Hello, welcome to Beloved Blackness, week 32. I'm Dr. B. So this week I want to talk about this notion of Pan-Africanism, and I want to take it from a direction that may seem familiar to some of you. So obviously the word pan is all, okay? And the idea behind Pan-Africanism is if we can have a sense of unity and connection, people of African descent, then within that unity, then we can be able to have a sense of togetherness, which then allows us to, one, feel good about ourselves and have a sense of belonging and connection, but also gives us power to be able to stand on a united front, even within our differences, against the impact of anti-Blackness and white supremacy domination. So you often hear, or at least I often hear, people push back. And they may not say, I'm not for Pan-Africanism, but some of the arguments that you hear when you talk about a sense of African-centered psychology or ways of thinking about things from an African-centered way, the pushback is often to focus and maybe even over-focus on differences. So you'll hear people say, oh, but there's so many different countries in Africa, so many different practices. And so that's why I spend so much time going through the culture, understanding what culture is and the layers of culture from Dr. Wade Noble's understanding. And so we have the manifestations at the top. And so typically those arguments are not thinking about aspects or factors, those more philosophical ways of thinking about culture. They're focusing on the manifestations. And that's problematic on many levels. But one of the reasons it's problematic is it doesn't get us an opportunity to understand the deep structure of culture. So that's why I spend so much time talking about the deep structure of culture and those layers of factors and then the aspects. Because if we focus on manifestations, then we only will be focusing on differences, those practices, those stereotypical things that we think of when we think of culture, right? The foods we eat, the rituals we have, all of those are important, but they're coming out of something else. And then we can focus on what's at the deeper layer of those particular manifestations, understand those aspects and those factors, then we can have a sense of connection, commonality, and understanding that then will allow us to have a sense of belonging with one another as people of African descent, a sense of connection, as well as a united front when we're thinking about how are we going to deal with anti-Blackness in the world and the fight against white supremacy domination. Well, in order to be able to do that, you have to have a cohesive sense of who you are, right? And even more importantly than that, than not just the reaction to, but most importantly, is to come from a place of wholeness, right? And so I often think of this analogy. I've thought of this analogy and will think of it when I hear people with the argument, but there's so many different countries in Africa. How can you say something's African-centered? I feel like you're watering down the experience. Or you hear it, sometimes you'll hear it in the States as, oh, but not all black people are the same, and so you can't say the black this, the black that in terms of the black experience. And so yes, there's so many different nations, and all of those nations, guess what, those countries in Africa were carved up through colonialism too, and so we got to keep that in mind. And so it doesn't mean there weren't tribal differences or differences across different villages prior to that. However, there were also some commonalities that are really important for us to focus on and to be aware of. The analogy that I was going to share with you that I came up with that I think really kind of captures it, if you were going plant shopping or flower shopping, you wouldn't walk into the plant store and say, oh my gosh, I can't believe they call all of these things plants. This should just only be focused on the rose. This should only be focused on the lavender. This should only be focused on the tulip. Heaven forbid we call them all plants, or we call all these flowers, right? Sounds kind of ridiculous. So when we do that with our experience as people of African descent, we're actually minimizing the beauty of our common connection. All right, so there's something really rich and valuable when we're able to see that commonality, and in no way does it discount or minimize or devalue or diminish the beauty of the differences, okay? And so it actually enhances those. When we can have an understanding of the deep layer of culture, then it actually enhances understanding what those manifestations and where they come from, as opposed to the other way around. Over-focusing on the manifestations tends to have people deny or neglect or even negate the beauty of the deeper layers of aspects and factors of culture. So think about this week. So maybe some ways in which you've internalized your oppression by wanting to focus on either just your own individual experience as a person of African descent, or a particular community within people of African descent, whether it's those who have a degree in this area, those who have degrees at all, or whatever those particular differences are, and reflect on why is that important to focus on the differences in that way, and how is it you can focus on the commonalities of our experience, and how does that enrich how you think about yourself as a person of African descent. All right, until next week.